Welcome to Unhinged
Magi.
Okay, we got a great episode for you guys today. We've got Angelo and Adam from the Northern Paladins. Now, this is a really special old school group, and I gotta rave about these guys a little bit.
That's why we're getting out the glow sticks.
Yep. Actually, I do have a lot of glow sticks downstairs.
Yes, you do.
I have a whole package of them, so don't tempt me. I will go get those. So the Northern Paladins are, I think, my favorite old school group, and specifically the reason is that they really enforce just good play standards. They want people to enjoy themselves. They're focused on kind of the experience and the environment and stuff like that. And I really like the attitudes. I like the leadership. I always have a good experience when I play with these guys. So top-notch group. And so we got two special guys here, and we're going to hear a little story about how they had an adventure into the realm of Proxies.
All right, cool. Let's hear it.
So, Angelo, you want to lead off?
Sure, you got it. Thanks for having us on, guys. I've been playing Magic for 26 years, and I owned a game shop for 15. I have a lot of experience with Magic and Proxies in a real-world environment. And when we were discussing our Paladin Magic format, which is just a modified Eternal Central rule set, we also discussed the idea of Proxies at the same time. And there was the usual calls of, it's going to ruin the environment, it's going to ruin the play experience, gross, I don't want to look at them, or, hey, that's illegal, those are counterfeits, that's terrible. All the fear that goes into the topic of Proxies came up in our groups, and we talked through it calmly, and we said, let's give it a shot, because I think it adds a nice baseline of even keel play. And we're a play environment, right? We play. This is a hobby. If we're going to do this for 15, 20 more years, I don't want the new guy to show up and be like, well, you can play mono black and that's it.
Yeah.
You know what I want
or
them
maybe
to...
goblins and then finish 10th place or something like that. Yeah.
Although goblins aren't as good in our format because desert kills them and there's no strip mine. So it's things like that you know what I mean? That changed the whole experience. So by and large, it's now been 1 year since we rolled out Paladin Magic and have allowed Proxies. And our group has doubled in size.
Size.
Yeah.
What was the original count?
About 250, 260, and we're a group of about 550 now.
That's good growth.
Yeah.
Holy.
That is really good.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
Now, also, I know that you've been whispering in his ear, but we have one other paladin that didn't make it here. Joseph Freshwater actually is another leader of the group. And I have been whispering in his ear for literally 2 years about Proxies as well.
Oh, I thought it was about dead people.
Yeah, well, there's dead people too.
Oh.
We do talk about dead people because I see dead people.
Yeah, I know.
But, but in this case, we're talking about Proxies. And so anyways, I've literally had a lot of one-on-one discussions with him about Proxies a while ago as well, trying to kind of push that direction.
Well, it's interesting because Joe and I have been in the same city for 25 years. And the reason why we didn't play Magic sooner together was because of Proxies and because of the stigma of the idea that somehow Proxies are bad. Because I was a proxy-friendly store for Commander 10 years ago. I didn't care if you didn't have the real card and you wanted to play because, if you're in my store, you're hanging out, you're having a good time, you eventually buy cards. And that's really true. It was one of my best nights of the week in the shop. Monday was the second or third best night of the week. And I always played and had a good time. So it really felt like very full community. Anyway, so, word travels around. If you're anti-proxy, don't go to Universe. Don't go over there. And when we did meet up, he wasn't pro-proxy, and that's fine. That was, like you said, a couple of years ago. And he's come fully all the way around. He understands why it's good for the community.
Yep.
Why it's good for players, and why it doesn't really hurt any of us who own a lot of cards. I had a play set of old school 9394, so it didn't hurt me.
A conversation between Joe and I is actually what sparked off this interview, because he messaged me about a week ago out of the blue, and he specifically sent me a message to tell me about the growth of your group and to tell me that he's reversed on Proxies and how great it's been.
Yeah, and it's also attracted good people. Yeah, there's a few culturation moments where you need to like communicate because you're gonna get slightly, I'd say maybe 10% more spike attitude coming from the proxy perspective. But then I also see in our existing community all this flavor and spice coming from cards that people they want to play, but they can't be convinced to spend the money on the card until they experience it, you know?
And there's an awful lot of cards in old school like that. I mean, your Eureka, Candelabra, Gauntlet of Might, Bazaar of Baghdad. There's an awful lot of really expensive cards that you really got to build around. And if that's not like your thing, it's like, how do you cough up 10 grand for those, right?
Bazaar of Baghdad is just awesome because of the dredge. I mean, that's just fantastic.
Yeah. True.
If you like,
it's big in vintage.
You can
for
play
sure.
any dredge, and then Bazaar of Baghdad is going to be top on your list.
Yep.
So I think people will shell out that.
Yeah. But in old school, I mean, there's actually like a much smaller list of decks that are good with Bazaar of Baghdad. So coughing up, like up to like 8 grand for a real high end set, or like 6 grand for like decently played set. But anyways, yeah, Bazaar of Baghdad is it's the exact kind of card that like if you're not loving that card, it's hard to cough up that kind of money. So having proxies enabled allows people to, just like you said, jump into Spice Zone, right?
Yep. Without that, ability to kind of flex and try things out, you might be if that particular deck, 10 grand on the line just to get in, just to try it.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people have seen that Reanimator in 93-94 isn't like tier 1 if you want to, think of it that way.
Yeah, definitely not.
But it won our Spice tournament with 70 players. So Reanimator actually stands up pretty good in Paladin Magic. And now people can proxy it and then they can enjoy it. And then also people who own those cards have a real home for that. And anyway, so in the last year, getting to meet people from all over the world and who are joining our weekly event. We run it every Tuesday night at 7 Central, and we run 3 rounds of Old School. It's not like a big 8-round event. It's 3 rounds of Magic. Come and hang out. And we've got 25 to 30 players like every Tuesday now. And
that's awesome.
Yeah. Maybe 10% of the people are playing with proxies, but those 10% of the people who were previously don't own any power and was just basically on auto loss for 3 rounds get to like at least pop their Mox Emerald and their Lotus in their mono green deck and have fun with them,
And by the way, I would absolutely be joining those Tuesday night tournaments. My work schedule unfortunately has me working until like 8 o'clock a lot of nights, so I can't. Like,
it's hard to
totally
find
understand. Yeah. Otherwise, I would totally be doing those tournaments with you guys.
Absolutely. And everyone is welcome. Anybody's watching this video right now, you can find us, northernpaladins.com, and you can join. You get all the details off our website for the Gauntlet or on the Facebook group, and come play with us for sure. Like, you're welcome.
So something I want to ask you about also is, it's always been my experience, and now you guys are both shop owners, so I really want to hear your take, both of you, on this. What I always experienced when I actually helped George run vintage tournaments at Ancient Wonders, we did proxy tournaments for a while, and he wasn't super enthusiastic about it, so I kind of had to get it going and be sure to be there consistently every week. What I noticed is people very timidly started playing at first, but then they more consistently started to show up, and they would show up with proxies, but the next thing you know, there'd be like a guy sitting there like, I got my first dual land, or I got my first demonic tutor. So what I always experience is people entered the format because they could, but then they grew love and passion for the format, and that always eventually turned into either they quit and did something else, or it turned into them buying cards. So the proxies actually started raising card prices because it added more buyers. And that was always the piece that people never believed me when I try to tell them. That was my experience. Have you guys seen anything like that?
Well, I can speak on that a little bit. It's funny you bring up, I knew that you were helping with Ancient Wonders with doing those proxy vintage tournaments. That actually happened at a couple other Portland stores. And this is shortly before I left Portland and moved back to the Midwest. But there was a number of stores that actually started to run vintage, legacy, and then some old school events. And I realized probably the pushback from the shop is those proxy events are unsanctioned.
Yeah.
So they don't get to register and get whatever sort of DCI payback they get from WotC from that.
Wasn't there also some kind of threat? Like, it's not just that they were unsanctioned, but wasn't Wizards kind of like huffy about it and was like kind of punishing the stores for it in some way?
I've heard that has happened. I don't know to what level that they actually punish stores, but without a doubt they were completely unsanctioned. So, and that's a kind of a big part of the relationship a brick and mortar store has with WotC is running sanctioned tournaments. So, but more and more stores started to run some proxy tournaments. And usually what they would do to run those is they would put a cap on the number of proxies you could
it was
use.
usually like 10.
Somewhere between 5 to 10 proxies allowed per player. Players had to declare those proxies up front so that there wasn't anything being done that was questionable.
Now, did you experience that second part, though, that like people that were consistently playing ended up turning into buyers?
Yeah, at any point. I mean, the more I can speak from personal experience as well as seeing how helping run the community by allowing people to enter into the format and build creative and, for that matter, competitive decks by using proxies. That definitely opens the door to them being more interested in investing for real in the game, especially if they're already Magic collectors.
Yeah,
owning some of those high-profile cards is always a big status symbol that they're able to connect with.
Yeah, even if you allow proxies in a tournament, when a dude sits down and says, boom, here's Beta Power 9, it's like, whoa. I mean, it makes a statement, right? People don't miss that.
I do.
Yeah, I mean, you having a Chinese counterfeit across the table from my alpha, power doesn't like. We know what you have, we know what I have, and we're not talking about how big or how little any of our collections are. We enjoy what we have.
Exactly.
And I don't want somebody who has that proxy to feel bad or even like, I'm lesser. I want them to look at that and be like, this is where I'm at right now. I get to be at the table. I get to engage. You are my peer, and we're hobbyists together.
Yes.
Right. And so if you don't have a guy who has the alpha power who shows up, you don't have that aspiration moment. You can't see it.
Yep.
You don't get to imagine, that journey. And 2 years ago, I had 0 pieces of alpha power. So you know what I'm saying? Like it is even in a year of that, we've been a proxy community. So what reason do I have to engage other than I want to? And so proxies.
So you literally are a person who went from proxies to real because of passion.
Sure. I mean, I had CE versions, so technically, right? People consider those proxies to a point. So we shifted away from that into alpha power. I like skipped over and I had some unlimited stuff, and I was like, I don't even like unlimited. Why am I buying? I'm just gonna buy some alpha. I don't care that it's more. I like it. It's the thing I like, and that's the whole point. Is that there's room at the table for all players, all collectors, everybody. Bring what you like. No one's here to look down on you. We're here to play Magic cards, and really more of the time it's about the gathering. Because like if we're going to hang out with dudes for like as many hours as we all hang out, it's way more about having a good time than it is about owning a thing or not owning a thing.
I really noticed that that's what defines like a lot of different like old school groups. Like it's, what is your intention in playing these games? Like some old school groups, they just go for the nostalgia. Some of them, I think, go for the Timmy kind of showiness, like put up either a really big win or have a very impressive deck. And some of them are kind of more about gathering people together and like just, it's like growing the group, growing the community, and like seeing everyone as equals and competing and kind of loving that game. That's kind of how I see Northern Paladins. It's one major reason I attach to that group so much. But I think, the rule that people declare on like what's allowed, I think speaks volumes about that actual group. And I think a lot of it is subconscious. I know a lot of people that I think are very good people, good-hearted people, but they're like I only like Swedish, like I only like, alpha, beta, unlimited, no revises crap, don't even want to allow it. And I get that, but it's like, I think that there's even like things that they haven't thought through in their own head about like, what's the message that you're sending? What are you necessarily trying to get at? Because it's one thing to say, I like to play with like beta power or something. It's a different thing when you say you have to. That's not the same thing. Demanding what your opponent plays versus just you playing what you like, two different worlds. And I think a lot of people don't see that break
Well, actually, I think that's all derived from the original WotC statement, where you actually have to play the cards, and for WotC, it made sense because they have to sell the cards. In order for them to sell the cards, you have to buy the cards and play with the cards, and it's more to their standard to actually buy. But it's kind of irrelevant now since it's been so many years.
Well, notice though that point I was just making, I was talking about revised compared to beta.
I know, but it's still pretty much the same thing. If we set up a set of rules and we say it has to be unlimited and higher, it doesn't really matter. You can say CE and higher or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
But it's ingrained into people because of the original statements from WotC. That's why they can't let it go.
That's a really good point. I've definitely ran into people that just haven't even thought about it. They've just always thought that way, and they never actually just sat down and mentally went through it to ask themselves, why don't I allow this? What am I going for? I've definitely ran into that. So like, there's definitely people when I have this proxy conversation, you can see those gears turning for the first time, and they're like, I never thought about it that way.
Well, it leads into exactly the history is very relevant here. So if you start at the history of the very first Magic proxy, which is Collector's Edition 1993, that's the way to look at it. It was not meant for tournament play. It wasn't legal in tournament play and totally not sanctioned. And it was sold as a full set, which is not the collectible nature of the game, but it was built off those same beta plates. So it's like it's the same game theoretically as beta, but it's not accepted anywhere the players could gather and play, which in 1993 was a lot more relevant than right now in 2020 with our ability to connect through the internet and with lots of friendly, hospitality spaces across the world that we can spend time together at. So, that being the case, if you start there and you work forward, you can see that there is a monetary incentive for Wizards of the Coast to keep that hard line. Yeah. And then there was a monetary incentive for the players to keep that hard line. And it started to become part of the culture of authenticism, of realness as you own the cards. And that became status in itself. But we've gotten a couple of decades outside of that. And so now it's like time to kind of pull back, reinvestigate, and look at the whole equation slightly differently. At least that's my perspective.
Spoken like a CEO.
Yeah. Just look at the numbers. Old school is much more friendly to proxies, like just a straight up proxy. They're very friendly to the collector's edition. And it just sure seems to me, I don't know if I'm in a bubble, but it sure seems to me like the old school format is just growing like crazy and people are very excited about it. Now, when you flip the coin and look at vintage, I have to really work to find people to play vintage with.
It's because there's so many dang cards.
Well, it's an overwhelming format to be sure as well. But it's like vintage is much less like friendly to proxies than old schoolers effectively are. And it feels to me like old school is still an expanding, growing format. And vintage feels like it's still shrinking.
That's because it's easy.
Do you think that's because vintage is a recognized WotC format where essentially old school, we're not really on their radar despite what we think?
There is an aspect to that. I don't think it's that people join old school and they're like, yes, fight the man. I'm glad I'm not. I don't think it's that. I do think that there is an aspect to where when we set up our own events, like you guys have your events and Dave Firth Bard does the summer derbies and stuff like that. And LobsterCon happens and all these other events and stuff like that. There's so much flavor added to the events that the old schoolers have. And there's such a different focus and there's such a different aura there. People a lot less worried about winning and stuff like that. I think that unto itself is a big thing. And I don't think it's so much that WotC doesn't run it. It's more just that you've kind of got a more mature crowd that's it's here for the love of it. And so maybe the very fact that players put together the format encourages that kind of mentality, which therefore creates a more fun environment, which therefore makes people want to play it. Maybe?
Right. Well, if it's all about enjoyment of time with each other, then it does, in fact, become less about the final win and outcome of the day.
Yeah.
Old school spends a lot of effort making sure to not put too much energy in who won Swiss. No, it's like, where's the spice? Who's the creative stuff? Yeah, of course, the guy who won, who takes top seat and second seat, there's glory in that. but it's mostly their glory. They mostly like, yeah, I did it. That's mostly it. It's not like this, crazy idea of pro magic. That's not what we're doing.
I actually feel bad these days if I walk into a tournament playing the deck. I actually feel a little bad because it's like I copped out and played the deck. I don't know. I'm not passing judgment. I say that's how I feel.
To kind of, there's been a lot of focus on our Paladin Magic format. To kind of circle back to what was the inspiration for creating it, it wasn't because we wanted a format where proxies could be played. It was because we wanted to scale back on the power level and some of the frustration of the unoriginality of a 4 strip mine 4 Mishra deck.
Yeah.
And so that's actually what I think was the roots of the creation of the format.
Yeah.
Proxies kind of became the next piece of the conversation.
Yeah.
And we opened the door to say, all right, we're not only going to scale back on some of the more boring aspects of your average old school deck, but by allowing proxies, it kind of tapped into that one important component of what the Northern Paladins as an organization is. And that's, we wanted to be as open and inclusive and find a way for people to enter into old school as easily as possible and be able to build decks and be creative with cards that are normally really expensive. It wasn't necessary to say everybody should go out and buy fake power 9 so they can rock Moxes. It was just like, as we were speaking of earlier, there's a lot of interesting, flavorful cards that I'm not certain I want to drop $500 so that I can play a Eureka or In the Eyes of Chaos, or it's ironic you mentioned Gauntlet of Might. I've got a deck that I'm ready to roll out as soon as I can play live again with people. I've got 3 Gauntlets of Might in there. It's not a card you're going to see in any top tier deck. It's a card you're going to see in a creative deck. So to be able to proxy it out to make sure it's even worth playing is a lot better than trying to figure out how to, buy 3 of them and decide if I'm going to use them.
And if you decide that you absolutely love the card and it's so much fun, you might end up buying them.
Yeah, sure. And you actually will learn things about the game at year 27 that you haven't experienced yet. And that's one of the best parts about proxies, is because you could have a completist collection, and that's great if you have that kind of money and you can do that, and that's what you decide to put your money into for your hobby. Or you can not, and you can just cycle through the cards slowly. But having access to everything doesn't mean everything becomes degenerate immediately. It just means, hey, we can try some stuff.
I suspect you guys probably have a lot of people that join your format thinking, like, I used to run into this all the time when I first started my channel. There was so many people that thought you either play the deck or you lose, or you have power 9 or you lose, and I'm not going to waste my time in that format. And over the years, I've noticed more and more people kind of waking up to the fact that old school is far more diverse than that. There's a large plethora of decks that can be right there in the tier 1, and then there's 10 times that amount of decks it's in the tier 2. Be very competitive. And people, they all thought, so many of them, not all, but they all thought it was the deck or you lose. So do you guys run into people realizing that also?
So you mentioned DFB before. Dave Firth-Bard, if you guys don't know him, is a great community organizer, and they're a non-proxy community, which is totally great. They run Atlantic and so forth. But there are people out east, like Philadelphia Old School, who are a proxy community that run Atlantic as their format, so you can play Atlantic style with proxies. So if you guys don't know about Philly Old School, check them out if you're an Atlantic player. But to dig into that, Atlantic is about making the most number of tier 1 decks that it can exist. That's kind of what DFB's kind of said before, I've heard him say. And our Paladin Magic was about making the most number of viable decks. So it's not about them having to be so good that they are just the best decks or the only ones we want to play. It was more the good decks in any other format are still good in our format. They're not not good. They're still good.
But they've lost a bit of that tier 1 luster, I think.
Right. It's kind of it adds all those other 10 tiers down below you were talking about.
Yeah.
Rise in relation.
I really like that, honestly. My favorite formats are the ones that have the widest number of decks right in that tier 1 and 2 slot. For me, that's the best, because then it's always going to be a different kind of thing. It's not oh, I'm playing Jace the Mind Sculptor, or I'm playing this Oko build or something like that. And that's it. That's all there is.
Sure.
It's you have all this diversity. You don't know what you're going to run against. I love that.
Well, it's two different ways of achieving the same idea, I think, is what I'm trying to say. Is it's just two different philosophies, and so are proxies. Proxies is a philosophy, accepting them or not, or only liking, like as you said, a certain version or edition of a card up to a certain point is another philosophy. And old school is now becoming so wide that whatever flavor preference you have, you can find a community and group. And I think it's way less about being tribalist and like holding the line against other people and being more like, what's out there? Who do we know? Like variety is the spice of life. If we're going to play Magic cards for another 40 years, guys, we should be able to do whatever, and we should be able to do it with whoever, where it makes sense. But obviously, I'm not here to try to change what any other club is doing. I'm just showing them that proxies don't destroy your community. They open up a wide window for a lot of players.
Yeah, I love that perspective. Like, I'm not trying to make them do anything. It's like I'm just trying to help them add this into their calculus when they decide to do things or not do things. Let's dispel the myths that they have about what proxies are and what they're not.
Absolutely. And I mean, a huge shout out to Jared Duchette and the guys over at Atlantic Neos, because they ran Paladin Magic for their December league. So it's super cool that they're running our format over there. Like, that's like a huge hug. Like, thanks guys. Love you too. Thank you. And that's what old school is supposed to be about, is making new friends, spending time enjoying a hobby we like, being good to each other, not the other way around.
Because that's priceless.
Yeah, it's priceless.
Well, that's probably a pretty good stopping point for this video. We've covered a lot of content. Do you guys have any final words on the topic of clubs doing proxies in their tournaments?
Well said.
Okay, end the video.
Right.
Yeah, I do have, I probably one point of view, just because I come from a different angle on it, having been involved as an organizer in 2 different clubs and having this debate with my fellow organizers. When Aaron and I first talked about what would be the Horde's proxy policy, in a sense, he and I both came at it from 2 different angles. I was very pro proxy, he was not, and that's all fine. Where we came to a consensus was our tournaments would not allow proxies, and I basically kind of fall in that camp in most from most angles. I think anytime there's an entry fee and competition, and you want to bring in a large community together and reward them for performance, I like the collectible card game aspect of it still existing.
Yeah.
Though we did talk about earlier in the video examples of unsanctioned where you have a cap on proxies. That's probably a good compromise. I personally am not, I don't participate in tournaments as much, and it's not my preferred way to play. I like a more casual environment. That would be my one statement, is having had to make a decision about what were we going to do about proxies back in Portland. We decided that for the casual events that I ran, example, when you came into town, that was just one big, that was nothing official for the Horde other than everybody meet up and play.
Yeah. That's all we did. We just showed up.
There were a number of new players who had just joined the group. They had 0 cards. They were just getting started, and a couple of them were starting to use proxies. That was the compromise
we showed up
made.
and just bought pizza and soda for everybody, and we all just sat down and just played games.
I heard what you said. We had a good idea in one of our other videos when we were talking about proxies, and what Edwin and I said, we were talking about renting cards. However, we ended up saying that if a person wanted to play proxies, what they should do is pay for each card that they have as a proxy.
Oh, yeah. I remember that video.
For like $1, and then it goes towards the prize pool of the actual winning.
Yeah.
So
that's a way to bridge that gap for tournaments with proxies.
If you bring the real cards in, you don't pay anything. But if you don't play the real cards in, it actually builds up the prize pool, and that I think was great for any kind of DCI tournament or any kind of group tournament that has prizes in it, because it just increases the prize pool. And that to me, I thought was a better compromise. We discussed that on the channel. I mean,
that was a really interesting idea. I liked that thought.
It was a great idea, and I want to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a good idea for tournament. I mean, absolutely, that's a good compromise. I think the important thing about proxies from an organizational standpoint, both for the Paladins and what we dealt with the Horde, is is it if you allow proxies in a casual environment, allow people to enter into the format, if they manage to acquire proxies, and that is what allows them to build decks and be creative and remain engaged, that's more important than whether or not their cards are real for a tournament. We don't want to exclude anyone from the format because the barrier of entry is so high.
Yeah.
And you may find that I've always actually found that the casual interest in playing old school is much bigger than necessarily the competitive side.
Well, that's true.
I realize that in most
kitchen table.
Kitchen table.
You
Exactly.
and I do that all the time, like literally on your kitchen table.
Yeah.
There's almost always a lot of focus on which particular region is running which tournament, and those are all fun and interesting, but there's also a lot of really cool casual events that are done that really are the glue of keeping a community engaged. That's where proxies frankly should be allowed. Let people be creative with their decks, build interesting stuff, play test ideas without having to invest in a card that they're just not sure they want to buy. And that's going to keep old school, and for that matter, any sort of vintage Magic, accessible and alive versus any sort of barrier to entry.
Okay, Angelo, do you have any final words on the topic?
So we do probably 2,400, 2,500 matches of Magic are played on our gauntlet over the course of a year of old school. You talk about casual Magic, 3 rounds of Magic. Like that is casual because it's not meant to be like a T8 grinder kind of thing. By and large, the end of the night, guys put their deck picks in. We pick our favorite creative for the night. We post the results on our webpage for the Gauntlet champions who go 3-0 and our Noble challengers who go 2-1. Any old school deck can go 2-1. There's enough variance in the format. I mean, as long as there's 75 cards from 93 to 94, you have a chance of being a Noble Challenger with even just trash, man. Thalids has won out on the night before. I mean, crazy stuff happens.
That is crazy.
It's like that's the kind of
Give
stuff.
me my farmer.
Yeah, no kidding.
And it can happen. And it does happen on a 3-round event because Magic's been stuck in this like 6, 7, 8 round gears, top 8 mentality for a long time. And so another like pivot here is let's do something that's not just that. Like, and it gets you, and like, you don't get fatigued. Sometimes on those big long days, you're like, okay, I've had a lot of Magic today. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you love it, but it can be tiring.
Yeah.
Like, so
brain drain. That's what I call it. It's just, you're just fogged.
Yeah. You start making mistakes all over the place because you're exhausted.
Exactly.
So casual Magic is alive and well, and even pseudo-organized community-wise for Paladins on Tuesdays. You know what I mean? Like it's out there, and I'm sure it's happening. Pickup games on webcam channels are happening constantly. So there's a lot of casual Magic happening, and with Proxies, it's enabling even more.
Okay, so thanks for coming, you guys. I'm gonna have some links for the Northern Paladins on the description section of this video. If any of you guys want to connect with that group and find out more about their tournaments and their play style and who they are,
they will.
And so, I sure hope so. I'd love to see your actual format grow, and I hope people that watch this video had a chance to kind of see the other side of the coin, on the acceptance side of Proxies, how good that actually can be and how it can work out. So thank you very much, Northern Paladins, Angelo and Adam, for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, guys.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Bye, everybody.